As we wrap up another year and we reflect on some of the things that we've learned, some of the insights that we've gained, there are still questions that are out there. And some of them have not been adequately addressed. And we're going to try to start addressing some of those questions related to some of the insights and some of the missing pieces. We're going to try to fill in some of those missing pieces. And so what we're looking at right now is the question of where is Jacob? Now let me tell you a little bit about where this question is coming from. It's coming from these identity dynamics with respect to Jacob in Scripture. It's related to sort of a clamoring to become Jacob by multiple people. And then there's also this dynamic that looks like a disappearance of Jacob, quite frankly. You have these multiple names for Jacob. You have these multiple histories for Jacob. And then you have Jacob sort of going into oblivion. And there's something about the Jacob narrative that is reminiscent of the Cain and Abel dynamic, where the question was, where is Abel? And the reply being, am I my brother's keeper? And so there's something about the Jacob dynamic that harkens to the Cain and Abel dynamic. What we're going to do right now, though, is give you food for thought and give you some questions for you to entertain and also to answer. You don't have to answer them in the here and now, but these are questions to reflect upon. These are questions for the most part that should have already been answered a long time ago, many of the questions, but many of them have been ignored for a number of reasons, and we're not going to do a lot of speculation about why that is. But we're just going to delve into this and move through this and hopefully get to a place eventually of greater insight. And so the first set of questions that we're going to address are questions that are similar to questions that have been asked of other people who've identified as ADOS or identified as American Indian. The question relates to lineage. And it's an important question because you have this clamoring for this Jacob identity. But there appears to be a lack of sufficient evidence to support the connection to Jacob in many instances. And you also have a situation where Jacob appears missing. You can find plenty of manifestation of what you would call Esau, Edom in the Americas, among the American Indians, also known as the red man, copper colored. That is a red metal. You can find manifestations of Esau, Edom in Africa, in Europe, and Asia. What you cannot find an abundance of are these patriarchs that are understood as being the descendants of Jacob. And so you don't see this significant evidence of Jacob's existence when you are looking at the evidence critically. And so there are some questions that people still need to answer, even if the answers are difficult or the questions appear difficult. And so we're just going to go through some of them, but these are the same types of questions that people have to answer, even if they are identifying as African or they are identifying as Indian or European. So let's look at these questions. Many people identify as a descendant of Jacob, but they may not have adequate information to actually inform this identity. Lineage is specific, and lineage is biological. And so when you think about this question of, are you a descendant of Jacob? That's the question that is being asked. Are you a biological descendant of Jacob? And if yes, who is your father, your patriarch under Jacob? Who is the son that you are under? The next question is, how have you traced your actual genetic lineage to Jacob or to a descendant patriarch? Again, as with other situations, it's important to do this because you have this clamoring for this identity. And there has to be a line of demarcation. There has to be some way of identifying who is Jacob and who is not Jacob. You can see lots of identification of who is Esau or who is Edom. And you need similar information to inform this genetic tie to Jacob. Another question to entertain, and this is important because of the dispersals, the exiles, are you claiming an adopted status into the lineage via things like custom, acceptance, and membership? Now, if you remember how the joining of the Scots clans work now, and the joining of American Indian groups, how that works now, you may have a thought that this same process of custom, acceptance, and membership might be relevant for this particular lineage. But really, when you're talking about lineage or you're talking about nativity, you really are talking about the biological dynamic. Next, are you claiming lineage in connection with those entities who were exiled? And so are you thinking that your identity is tied to the specific people who were in exile, or the specific people who replaced the people who were exiled? And so the follow-up question is, are you claiming lineage in connection to those who were in Babylon, including those who participated in the population transfer? So either those who were exiled, transferred out, or those who were transferred in. Those who have a lineage coming out of Babylon, one of the things to keep in mind is that there was a process of appropriation that took place, because what you had were individuals who transferred in, and then they were basically given the identity of the people that left. So they were given information about the customs, the belief systems, the heritage, the history. And so there was a claiming of this when there was no genetic descendancy. The next question is, are you claiming descendancy based upon circumstantial evidence? And if yes, which circumstantial evidence serves to place you in Jacob's male line? Now, some people believe that circumstantial evidence is never admissible, but there are times when it is admissible. And so if that's what you're basing it on, take some time and really think about, what evidence are you using for you personally? This isn't a collective dynamic. This is not a group exercise. This is an individual exercise. As with any claim to lineage, there's no collective we when it comes to these questions. The next question is, are you claiming descent through Jacob's daughter? And if yes, how have you traced your actual genetic lineage from Jacob through his daughter? And so now we have another set of questions, and these questions are related to Israel. We've addressed some of these questions before in another conversation where we did a history of the name. We did a deconstruction of the name. And what was revealed is that this name is substantially similar to names that might be seen as rivals even. So you have this name being substantially similar to Ishmael. You have this name being substantially similar to an entity identified in the book of Enoch. And there are some atypical dynamics with respect to the naming of Israel, this renaming of Jacob. There is substantial renaming in the scripture, and it definitely requires examination. Most people are not renamed to this extent over their lifetimes. And so it's pretty heavy with this renaming dynamic. And so you have Jacob being renamed Israel, not once, but twice. And then you have these parallel paths going on where there are narratives about Jacob that are side by side with narratives about Israel. And you will see this even in the same sentence, where Jacob and Israel are connected by the word and, suggesting distinct entities. This is definitely something that requires significant examination, particularly for those who are identifying as being lineal descendants of Jacob. And so then, along with this superimposition question, is who might have sought to superimpose Israel onto Jacob? What purpose would this serve? And then what are the implications for the duality? Now, some of these issues may be answered with editing. Whoever did the editing may have taken some sort of editorial license and done this. But that's not likely the case. There seems to be something else going on here that is more concerted, and it's not tied to these discrete instances where you see this parallel path going on. There are a number of dynamics going on, again, with the meaning of the name in and of itself, and the constant reminding of the name, and then the situation where Jacob is only supposed to be going by the name Israel, but then the name is used interchangeably throughout most of Scripture where it is indicated. And so these are some things for you to reference. We're going to look at some specific Scripture for you to think about. And so some of the things to make note of are, again, that Jacob and Israel are simultaneously named in a single sentence and construct in some instances. And there's a connection with the word and in each instance. And so again, what are the roots of this duality? And then what are the implications of the duality? Now you see some of this duality in Genesis, Numbers, and the book of Isaiah. And I also want to encourage you about something. Sometimes you listen to people who are giving lectures, or they are giving sermons, or they are doing some sort of exegesis or some sort of analysis or commentary. It's important that when they are doing that, that you actually have your own scripture, not on the internet, but a hard copy, and that you are following along, making sure that what they are showing or whatever they are talking about is the same thing that you are seeing when you look for it. And so you don't want to be a passive learner with respect to this situation. You want to be very active. And so some of the things that we're going to be talking about going forward, you want to be very active in terms of the process, because being very passive is not going to get you to where you need to be. So now we're picking up here at Genesis 34:7, and you see again this duality with the use of the name Jacob and Israel simultaneously in a sentence. And here you see this parallel dynamic with the name Jacob and Israel simultaneously in a sentence in Genesis 46:5. And here at Numbers 23:23, you see this situation yet again, where you see this parallel dynamic, where you see Jacob and Israel in the same sentence, almost as if they are being contrasted with each other, but with the same application. And here at Numbers 24:5, you see the same parallel dynamic yet again within the same sentence. And then we move into Isaiah. This is Isaiah 44:21, and you see this same parallel dynamic. It's stating here, "Remember these, O Jacob and Israel, for thou art my servant." And so again, you have this parallel dynamic going on that requires significant attention. Now, for some individuals who are passive learners and who do not want to deal with all of this, they may come up with very simplistic, automatic, reactionary offerings in terms of the explanation for it. But you are encouraged to think a little deeper past whatever your first reaction might be, and also dig a little deeper. And so do some research, study, and show yourself approved. This is Isaiah 48:12, and you see the same dynamic with respect to this parallel identity in the same sentence. And finally, you see this again in Isaiah 49:5. We're going to wrap this up with a final question of where is Jacob? If you look at the screen, you see this interesting mound known as Monk's Mound. Take note of the way that it is structured. It's not structured like any other pyramid. It has a very unusual structure. What's also unusual is the fact that when the colonizers arrived, the people purportedly disappeared. They were no longer here. There were all of these disappearances of people that were found here, according to those who engaged in the colonizing effort. So there are some people who were here. They are no longer here. The question is, who were they? Then you have another dynamic whereby certain people who were reported as found here, they have been given a certain claim to the land. They've been given resources in association with this claim. And then you have other people who make similar claims, but they have been marginalized. They've been disenfranchised. They have been unvoiced, basically, and then sort of disinherited, if you will. And so in this particular instance, they have also been renamed. And so their identities have been changed. It's not just that some were accepted as the civilized ones. You also have those that were not accepted, and they were identified as something completely different. And so there's a question about who are they really? And then is there any connection between those who are marginalized, those who are disenfranchised, and those who disappeared? Those who are related to these mounds and not in the way of building the mounds. Again, you also have this dynamic of the people who are in these positions of power and ownership of the land, recognition. They also tend to be tied to what would be considered Esau or Edom. Even with the name, the description of the people, you have this hearkening to Esau, the red man, the copper-colored man. The question is, as with Abel, where is Jacob? Remember, knowledge is power. Take care. See you soon.